The information contained in this podcast is an expression of opinion and does not constitute investment advice. This is the GoldMoney Foundation podcast with Dominic Frisby, keeping you up to date with expert opinion on precious metals and the markets.
Hello and welcome to the GoldMoney Foundation podcast, hosted in association with Frisby's Bulls and Bears, with me, Dominic Frisby. Now it's early December. I'm sitting at the Mines and Money conference in London, and opposite me is a gentleman called Jamul Jadamba. Now, Jamul is from Mongolia, and I heard him do a presentation about a company that he's involved in that's operating in Mongolia just yesterday. And Jamul, you began that presentation with an amazing fact, or what I thought was an amazing fact, which is that the population of China is 1.4 billion, and the population of Mongolia, which isn't that much smaller, is just 2.8 million. I find that incredible. So we're going to talk about Mongolia. So why don't we start with that statistic and what it might mean?
Well, it means that there is a tremendous difference in scale, in the size of the economy, in the ability of Mongolia to leverage China's growth via becoming the supplier of choice for various commodities that China needs to grow. Since we have a small population in Mongolia, we are not going to go through the typical route of growth for a lot of emerging markets, which is through manufacturing. We simply don't have the labor force for that, and we cannot really compete with other countries such as Vietnam or Bangladesh on manufacturing, given the fact that we're a landlocked country as well. Our strength is natural resources. Our strength is the fact that we have 1.6 million square kilometers of land, which happens to be some of the most geologically prolific pieces of earth. So Mongolia should utilize its natural resources for growth and should emerge as a key commodity player in the region.
Okay, of all the various commodities that Mongolia has, I mean, I've heard of copper, I've heard of gold mines in Mongolia, coal. Which resource are you currently most excited about?
Well, I'm really quite excited about coal. Exports of coal from our country went from virtually nil a decade ago to about 15 million or so tons per year, expected to go about 40 million tons in the short while, and I would not be surprised if in the next 10-15 years Mongolia goes over 100 million tons of coal exports, mainly to China, but perhaps to some other destinations such as Korea, Japan, India, etc. I'm also quite excited about copper. I think the fundamentals are very sound, and particularly given the turmoil in global financial markets, precious metals are obviously quite an interesting play.
Have you seen, let me ask, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you, Jamul?
I'm 35 years old.
35. So in the course of the last 10, I mean, you're obviously from Mongolia, but you've spent many years outside there in North America. Have you seen people become millionaires in Mongolia overnight in the last 10 years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the most dramatic example of this would be a company called MCS, which is one of probably the biggest conglomerate in Mongolia, and it's controlled by two brothers. They floated a coking coal project that they renamed Mongolia Mining Corporation. They floated on Hong Kong, and as a result of that floating, these gentlemen became probably worth $3-4 billion in net worth, and compare that to the overall size of the GDP, which stands at about 6 billion. So literally you will have guys walking down the streets of Ulaanbaatar that are worth something comparable to the national GDP. So obviously, this is a very interesting junction in our history. We're just going through an inflection point, and a lot of wealth is being created. As it typically tends to be, initially at least, the minority benefits from it. But I have all hopes that the development of the country will be able to lift the country as a whole. We certainly don't have a lot of people to take care of.
I suppose it's a good question to ask you from here is the political situation in Mongolia. Why don't you give us a quick potted history of Mongolian politics and where you are now?
So Mongolia is quite unique in the region. It's quite unique in the world in the sense it is the only nomadic culture in the world that retains its own sovereign nation, where it is not just the predominant majority, but basically the entire population, and that has not culturally assimilated to, sedentary cultures around. I mean, we have had other nomadic people of Eurasia that, immigrated like the Turks to Anatolia or other places in Central Asia, which kind of lost touch with those roots. So Mongolia is culturally very unique in that sense.
And people are still nomadic?
Absolutely. We have probably somewhere around 40% of the country living the traditional lifestyle.
Traveling by horse and going from place to place?
Well, these days it's horse, but also motorcycle and trucks. These days nomads have satellite dishes and cell phones, but nomads nevertheless.
And I find it amazing that people are nomadic by car. I mean, it's a wonderful image. And does this not bring up all sorts of issues with property rights and who owns what and title and so on?
Right. The current state of legislation in Mongolia, only urban land can be privatized. Rural land can be leased for agricultural reasons, for example, wheat harvesting. But otherwise, land belongs to the people, quote unquote. So it's a birthright of a Mongolian to pitch his ger, or what's known as a yurt in the West, pretty much anywhere in the country.
And what about staking property for mining? How do you go about that?
So a company would acquire initially an exploration license that gives you rights to explore for all minerals in the land. It does not necessarily give you ownership of the surface. Once you are completed with the exploration program, you can petition for a mining license, which gives you the permission to mine whatever deposit you happen to have. In terms of surface rights, the population density of Mongolia, I think it is the most sparsely populated country in the world, at about 1 person per kilometer square or something.
Maybe
like that.
Greenland or somewhere like that is more scarcely, but I take your point.
Right. It is very sparsely populated. The areas where you have the mining exploration and mining activity tend to be in the south, in the desert or semi-desert regions of Gobi, so they are even less populated. So typically, for a mining operation, we do not typically have big villages or population centers, so it's not currently much of an issue. And obviously, people are looking for employment. So a mine coming in or a mining company coming in and offering jobs is at least currently viewed as a positive thing.
Okay, I mean, I suppose, is it potential that somebody could build a mine and then a bunch of nomads could come and pitch their tents? And I mean, does that have the potential to become an issue, or is it just not realistic?
If you refer to what I said earlier, it is a country that is homogeneous in nature. You have those issues in Canada with native populations, in South America, etc. We are the native population. So it is not as if some outsider ethnic or religious or outsider group coming in and developing these assets. No, these assets, at the end of the day, via the royalty and tax system, benefit all Mongolians in that sense. So people are very much supportive of the mining industry. Of course, there are environmental concerns, and of course, there may be issues where certain territories are ancestral pasture lands for certain groups of people. But overall, we are dramatically shifting away from the pastoral nomadic way of life into more modern, albeit natural resource-based, but industrial economy. So I would not say that it's a huge issue unless it happens to be in environmentally sensitive areas.
Okay, now I imagine that one of the big issues facing a resource company who's trying to operate in Mongolia is less trying to discover a resource and more trying to build some kind of infrastructure around the resource that you've discovered. Is that right?
No, I would say both, because historic exploration work that was done in Mongolia was very good, broad-based mapping, but very few deposits, in fact, were discovered. If you look at, the biggest by value deposit in Mongolia was only discovered, in 2002, 2003, Oyu Tolgoi.
That's the Ivanhoe mine.
That's absolutely right. Each year, world-class deposits are being found. So it's very much a place where we are minerally rich, but we don't have the 150 years of intensive state-of-the-art exploration that Canada has or Australia has. We have not had that yet. We only have less than 10 years of modern exploration being applied to Mongolia. So in that sense, no, there are many more world-class deposits to be found, I would hope. Typically, these deposits come in clusters. So, for example, in the south, would not be surprised to see a number of big copper deposits. Or, again, in the Gobi, would not be surprised to find a number of substantial coking and thermal coal deposits, etc. So that's the issue number one. I think there are many more discoveries to be made. Second issue about infrastructure, the infrastructure situation is indeed quite poor. There is only a single rail line that cuts from north to south through Mongolia. It's called the Trans-Mongolian Rail Line. And there's another rail line that goes from northeast into the town of Chor, which was built essentially for uranium exports back in the days. However, the Parliament of Mongolia approved a scheme for development of the railway system of Mongolia. So the political decision has been made. I believe preliminary work on the extension of the rail line that cuts through south of Mongolia, through the east to northeast to connect the Chorbosan to Russian Trans-Siberian railways has already commenced. So it's all happening. To connect all the mineral-rich regions of Mongolia, you probably need, I would say, maybe 7,000 kilometers of rail. And fortunately, in many parts of the Mongolia where exploration work is being conducted, namely south and the east, it's very friendly topography. So you probably could build rail at a pretty fast rate.
And is there a huge land grab going on at the moment? Is everyone trying to stake land and secure their bit of the pie?
There are about 1,500 mineral licenses that are in the hands of private companies and individuals in Mongolia. Majority of those licenses are in Mongolian hands. Currently, there is a presidential moratorium on issuance of new licenses because they're trying to clean up some of the rules and regulations and perhaps an amendment to the minerals law to clean it up because, how these licenses were issued, etc. I mean, certainly things could have been handled better in the 90s. So they're trying to clean that up now. So as it stands right now, you cannot stake new properties at the moment. I would imagine the moratorium will expire shortly, and then you will be able to go through a competitive process to acquire new mining tenements.
Okay, and your democracy is how old?
Our democracy is, at this point, 20 years old. We had 5 parliamentary elections. We have a kind of a mixed parliamentary system. We basically have 2 competing political parties.
Was it communist until then?
It was a communist country until the collapse of the whole socialist system in the East. We were actually the second oldest communist country in the world after Russia, but we've had a peaceful transition to democracy, and we're unique in being the only robust, real Western-style democracy in the region.
Bureaucratic problems?
Oh yes, I mean there is certainly a legacy of the old Soviet-type system. I think civil services and government is quite big in Mongolia. It's there are corruption concerns, etc., as you would find in a lot of emerging markets. So I would not say it's perfect, but doing business in Mongolia is not very difficult, I would say. You can incorporate a business in a matter of days. There are very few restrictions at all. You can bring in capital and take out capital at will.
And the currency, is the currency stable?
The currency is Tugrik. It's strengthening against the dollar, so that brings another component to investing in Mongolia. It was the second best performing currency after the Aussie dollar last year. So it actually compounds your returns on Mongolian investments.
I have a hedge fund manager who emails me from time to time who was looking at buying Mongolian government bonds. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a sound investment?
I think so. I mean, it's certainly a bet on the currency.
He's getting a higher rate of interest than US government bonds, and the currency was appreciating against the dollar, so he was winning both ways.
Absolutely. And right now the government is yet to receive revenues from these large-scale mining projects. So you certainly would get a higher yield than you would once the government is flush with the cash years down the line. So I would say it is a good investment for people who understand emerging markets and understand the associated risks.
Well, Jamul, I mean, what a fantastic interview you've just given. It's been so interesting hearing you talk about your country. And I guess if I want to start a business in Mongolia, Jamul Jadamba is the person I should contact. So if there's a way that people want to get in touch with you, do you have a website? Do you have a company that you'd like to plug?
Yes, absolutely. The most advanced of our projects is a Canadian company called Mogul Ventures Corp. It should be listed and trading on the Toronto Stock Exchange, on the Venture Exchange, hopefully sometime in the first quarter of 2012. This is a coal exploration and development company with a sizable project in southern Mongolia, close to infrastructure. You can reach me at my email, JJ, those are my initials, at aumogul.com.
Great stuff. Well, Jamul Jadamba, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Subscribe to the Gold Money newsletter at www.goldmoney.com to receive email updates on new articles, videos, and iTunes podcasts from our Gold Research section.